Hey guys, and welcome to my channel. So as you guys know, I just recently moved. I went from an apartment to a house. The house is only a little bit bigger, but I do have my own space for all of my figures. But moving with figures was more than a little stressful. I was not ready for what I needed to do in order to take care of my figures and make sure nothing was broken or nothing was damaged. And I did pay the price a little bit, but I wanted to share with you guys what I kind of figured out, my experiences, so you guys know how to move with figures and keep them safe and hopefully not broken. So learn from my mistakes. But let's kind of jump into it. So the first tip I have is the type of bubble wrap. Might not seem like a big deal, but it does make a difference. When you bubble wrap your figures, you don't want to use large ones. They tend to be a little too big for figures, and they're a little too pushy for them as well. Sometimes with a lot of figures, especially ones with smaller details that stick out a little bit, like hair or outfits, these actually push them out too much, and it can break them if you're not careful. It also doesn't give the extra support and protection that figures actually need. Because of the spacing between them and how big they are in general, they kind of only protect certain spots on your figure. So they don't really do a great job for most figures. They might be good for some of the big ones, but even my big ones, they were so detailed that these big bubble wraps it didn't really work so great for it. So instead, I recommend your traditional small ones. These cover the figures pretty well. They make sure that every piece is more protected, a little bit more safe. These are also really great for those smaller details that stick out, such as hair and feet. And even one of my big figures, if you guys remember from an old haul video, my big Demon Rem figure has a lot of pieces that stick out. So I had to use a lot of bubble wrap between each layer to make sure it all didn't get bent. My other tip on bubble wrap is use as much as you want, as much as you feel comfortable, making sure that they're safe. I used a ton of bubble wrap. I was terrified that my stuff was going to break, so I used a lot of it. Now you guys might be wondering, why are you talking about bubble wrap? Why didn't you just put them back in their boxes? See, I did not want to put them back in their boxes. The thing about putting figures back is you have to take them apart. And for a lot of figures, that's actually really dangerous to do. They are flimsy. Sometimes the pieces that are stuck together are really flimsy, and taking them out could actually break them. I didn't want to risk that. I have a lot that it was really hard to get them in to begin with, and I can't imagine taking them apart. So I did not do anything back in the box. I transported the boxes separately in a bigger box, and they worked out that way, but I didn't want to risk messing up my figures even worse by taking them apart. So that's my recommendation. That just is how it kind of worked for my figures. It might be different for you if your figures are kind of easily come apart to begin with, such as Nendoroids. They kind of pop out. You could probably put those back in the box. They probably would fall apart anyways on transport. So you could probably put things like that. But otherwise, I didn't. I bubble wrapped all of my figures, and it worked out pretty well for me. I was able to condense down a little bit better rather than putting them back in their boxes. Just wrapping the individual figures and putting those in boxes meant that I had fewer boxes filled with figures, and they were a little bit more tightly packed together, so they were a little bit more secure in that way as well. So that ended up working out for me. Now, a caveat of not taking those apart, though, is the little pieces that aren't really stuck on there or kind of loose. Those you do want to take off. Those will not stay on the figures, for one. And in addition, when you're wrapping your figure, it could actually mess up those little pieces because they're loose and they can kind of move around, that they don't really have a certain spot that they go with. So definitely recommend taking those off. And on top of that, I do not recommend wrapping those little pieces in with the bigger figure. A lot of times, and I speak from experience, you'll forget that those little pieces are in there. So when you're unwrapping your figure, they'll just fall out. They kind of move around a little bit more during transport as well, so they're not as secure. My recommendation would be to maybe bubble wrap those and put them in a sandwich bag, and you could put like a bunch of the little pieces together so you can keep them all nice and safe. That would be my recommendation there. I did not do that. I did wrap the little pieces with the figures, not on the figures. I would take them off, but then I'd wrap them in that same big wrap. And I definitely dropped a lot of pieces when I unwrapped it. The thing is you don't know what you're unwrapping because you can't really see until it's too late and the pieces are on the floor. So definitely recommend taking those off as well. Of course, if you do end up taking those pieces off and keeping them separate, you're going to want to make sure you remember what goes where. And it sounds like that would be so easy and so obvious, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes, for example, there are stands that are really plain and have nothing on them signifying what they are, and you take them off and you have no idea who they go to. I made that mistake. I was really lucky that I was smart enough to pack stands really close to their figures to begin with, so I knew which ones went where. But for some of the plainer stands, it is a little bit harder. Now, I definitely do recommend, for most figures, taking them off their stands. Usually those pieces will bend and break if this stand gets kind of shoved around a little bit. So if they're easy to come off, I definitely recommend taking the stands off and then just wrapping those separately from the figure, but making sure they're still with the figure. And again, if you do have things that are not obvious, make sure you make note of where they are. Though you may think you'll remember, you might not. Moving is very stressful. It's very all over the place. It's probably not going to be the number one thing on your mind. So make sure you note down somewhere, even like on a sticky note, and put it in the box. What goes where everything needs to be put together, all of that detail. When you're wrapping all of your figures, I also recommend using small boxes. So piling them all into these small boxes packed pretty tightly together so nothing happens, rather than using big boxes. So I used rather large boxes to pack all my figures. I have a ton of figures. I wanted to save transportation. I didn't want to transport so many things and all at once, and I was just really stressed about transporting my figures. So I put everything in big boxes. It was a big mistake. Big boxes are more easily and more likely to be knocked around, kicked, a little bit during trying to get through the rooms, and also don't always fit in doorways. I say that because the house I'm in, the doorways are actually kind of small. And unfortunately, when I had a large box of figures in my hands, they got caught and I was not expecting it, and I dropped the whole box and the whole box fell on the floor of all my nice figures. Luckily, nothing was broken, thank goodness, but it definitely was a risk and definitely something I learned. So use little boxes that you can fit. It's better to have a bunch of little boxes. They're a little bit easier to manage, easier to make sure that they are safe and tucked away. Don't use the big ones like I did. Another kind of offhand tip is don't be frustrated or stressed out when you're actually packing your figures. I got a little overwhelmed while I was packing everything. I just got frustrated with how much work it was, and I wasn't as careful with my figures as I probably should have been. I think there were a couple things that I accidentally broke just because I was frustrated I wasn't being careful, and I definitely regret that, and I regret being so stressed out about it and not doing it in a more relaxed and time-sensitive way. Definitely something you have to think about, both packing and unpacking your figures. You have to take the time to be careful with them to the degree that you're going to be happy with. But I definitely was disappointed in myself when I broke a couple things because I was rushing and not being careful how I should have been, how I felt I should have been. So definitely recommend trying to do it in a relaxing way and making sure you're breathing as you put things away. One of my last tips is, if you like your setup before and you want to replicate it, take pictures. I was really happy with myself because I actually took videos of how I had everything set up. And then when I got into this house, the videos didn't work that great. It was like play, pause, play, pause. So I recommend pictures above video, just a little detail there. And then I honestly ended up not really sticking with my layout. I redid everything because I wanted things in different spots. I wanted to highlight different things. I was kind of like switching some things out to focus on some shows instead of other ones, and kind of making a change there. But I did really like that I had thought of that beforehand, so I at least had something to go off of. And then it also really helped because I had a small panic moment where I thought I forgot figures, and luckily I did not. There was just an extra box hidden away. But it also really helps to keep track of everything that you have as well. Now, very lastly, my biggest tip of all, don't be frustrated if something does break. Everything can be fixed. I unfortunately broke a few items during my move, and I was a little upset, but you know what? You can fix them. Everything can be fixed. And a lot of the times, it looks just as good, just as it was brand new. So it's okay if something breaks. It's disappointing, but it's not the end of the world. You can fix it. You can figure out a way to make it just as good as brand new, or just as good as it was if you have pre-owned ones like me. And that was a big thing that I had to come to terms with too. You can fix it. Just keep that in mind. And if you're struggling to fix it, Google. You know, Google has a lot of really cool ways of little tips and tricks on how to fix things. I had to use it for a couple figures that just were not staying together, but they worked for me. So don't worry. You can do this. You can fix it. It's not the end of the world. You got this. So that's it for my moving video. Those are all my tips and tricks. I can't really think of anything else, but if you guys have some tips and tricks that you recommend, some advice, please make sure to comment down below so everyone can know and I can learn as well. Maybe do a better job next time that I move. As always, if you like my videos, please don't forget to like and subscribe. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!